Thank you, Hinder.
Okay.
And thank you, Seher. Yeah.
Okay. My name is Selvaraj. Thanks for this great training, which is it is totally free and very interesting.
Yeah.
From my side, I have a small request because I had to attend a very important meeting yesterday. I couldn't join the training on time.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I don't know which URL to use on the code sandbox when we start seeing the results. From the previous training, I know when we start the code sandbox project, we have to enter a URL, then usually we do enter the admin and the district user credentials.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't complete the exercise yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe if you share the URL name once again. Yesterday, actually, I think Austin actually responded to my query on the forum Slack, but I couldn't actually. I failed to find it correctly. So
Sure.
I am requesting now once again.
Yeah, thank you. So there is a DHIS2 instance that's available for the Academy, as I think everyone knows here. But yeah, the URL for that was in the first presentation that I gave. So it would be difficult if you weren't able to join at the beginning, I would imagine. It is also, however, in the on the Academy page. So if we go to the Academy itself, the Academy page here, which is application development part 2. Oh no, sorry, this is not what I wanted. Sign in. Yeah. You need to be signed in and registered for the course.
Oh, it is here.
Yes.
I think it is on the right side, useful links. Our DHIS2 instance for the workshop.
Yes. So yeah, here we have the instance and the URL for it here. So you would use this as this as the URL for the DHIS2 instance when you're using your code sandbox.
Sorry about that. Maybe this is what you were mentioning yesterday, but I was so something kind of missed out after the training, which I missed. Thank you very much, Justin.
No worries, yeah. And there are many different things going around. So as you did on Slack, feel free to ask any questions because sometimes things just get lost or are misplaced. So no problem at all. Cool. Any other questions on that before I go over some of the content for this project?
Yes, it's Gerard again.
Yep.
So I had almost the same problem as the host previously. So I used to work with the sandbox, but I submit the wrong URL on the first task. So I was asking if there's a way, but what I did, I just had on the second task 2 submission, I had the 2 URL, and I had the label. This is for task 1 submission. This is for task 2 submission.
Yeah.
I asked the question on Slack also, but I didn't have.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm sorry, I haven't had a moment to approach it, but yeah, I will reset that and let you know when I reset it so that you can resubmit that project. That's no problem. Cool. So I saw that there were still not a ton of people that have submitted the 1, 2, and 3 tasks for yesterday. So I'm not going to give the entire answer for everything, but I will use it as kind of a learning opportunity for people. So first of all, let's look at the task 1 submission and just kind of review what that task was and how you might go about it. So for our exercise 1, which is task 1 here, just have to use any type of advanced data query in the simple code sandbox that's shared here. You just have to use one of the advanced functionalities or features of the data query and data engine to, in this simple code sandbox. So let's go ahead and open that up, and we're going to do this together. There are many different ways to solve this problem. So ideally, you will everyone will have a different solution. But the general purpose is that we have this empty component, and we need to use a use data query feature to do something a little bit more advanced than normal here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by just creating a very simple component here. And we're going to say return hello. And this is just returning a string, nothing super exciting. But basically what it does is it just returns a string here. And we're going to turn this into something that uses data query in an advanced way. As you can see on the right here in this code sandbox, I didn't go through this yesterday, but it was from the first workshop. It should reload once it's loaded the first time, it should reload the code sandbox on the right here so that you actually show your application once it's initialized. There we are. And here we have, as we saw, thank you for that question, by the way. This is where we will put in our, this is where we put our URL for the Academy instance, and then our admin and district username and password. And we sign in there. And now we have this advanced query component. It just comes from the app.js. Don't have to worry about that. And we have our component is rendered here. So it's just rendering hello. And we could add, let's add some exclamation points, save that. And it should show up here on the right as well. So now we have hello with some exclamation points. Did anyone have trouble with Code Sandbox or with logging into the instance from that application that they weren't able to get through before doing this?
Just a thing, Austin, is there
Yes.
any way to minimize or to even close the browser tag of Sandbox and the terminal when you are using another window for the browser? I don't know. I'm just asking.
So you can do this where you just drag it to as small as you like. I don't think you can close it completely, but you can make it very, very small.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was doing, but I thought that maybe it could be closed even. Okay, thank you.
As far as I know, it isn't, but I'm not a Code Sandbox expert. Maybe some.
I think I looked into that for the first workshop. I think you can just minimize it completely, and then what is quite handy is if you click the link on the top right to open it in a different window, then you can have one window for your code and one window for the application, and it should still be doing auto refreshing and stuff like that.
Yeah. And so you mean minimize it just like this, so as thin as possible?
Yeah, I think they've changed the UI a little bit. Before, when a few weeks ago, you could still minimize it completely just by dragging it to the side. But yeah, I think this is the best it can do now.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. But so that everyone can see, can everyone see this code, or is it too small?
It is too small, please.
Too small. Okay, I will use this functionality then. So we have this here, and I will switch between this and the other tab, and this is the query.
Hello.
Sorry? Hello.
Yes, I was going to say that we had some problem trying to log in yesterday into the instance.
Okay. Were you able to solve it? No.
Even now, it is not connected. The URL is correct, and we used admin as username and password. We used district, but when you try to log in, it didn't succeed.
Okay. Are you using Chrome?
Yes, we are using Chrome.
Okay,
But
I'm gonna cover this because I think a few people ran into this. So I think as few people ran into this, and I think this is very likely what you ran into, Didier. But this is basically the issue that I mentioned yesterday, where in Chrome and soon in Firefox beta channel, the applications that are talking to a server that is not on the same URL as the application will stop working sometimes. So in order to get around that, there's a few workarounds. The main one here is to turn on this same site, or turn off this same site by default cookies flag in Chrome. So you can click this link in this, oops, that not work? Well, maybe the link doesn't work. That is strange. Anyway, so I should change that so that it actually does the link. But you go to Chrome flags, //flags. And then you can search for same site. And you have same site by default cookies, which is one of the settings for Chrome. The URL that you would use is this one if you are using your own Chrome instance. I will share that on Slack now as well. I'll also share the link to the article. Thank you, Jan Gerke. So Jan Gerke mentioned that, and it looks like when you have a small screen, it also automatically hides, maybe. I'm not sure. Yeah, but there should be a toggle button also. Let's see. Toggle button for this browser completely, so you can actually hide it completely. So Sergio, that's your answer. You have this toggle preview button that allows you to toggle the browser on and off.
Well, that's great. Thank you to Jan Gerke and to you.
Yeah, no problem. I'm sorry, I got distracted there for a minute. Anyway, so when you are, your application is trying to talk to a remote instance, it will not work if this is set to the default value. So if you have this as default, and I would have to restart my Chrome browser to make this take effect, then it will look as if you cannot log into DHIS2. That's because the cookie which is how we do authentication, does not connect to the remote server. It isn't included. So there's a whole article about why this happens and how you can work around it in different situations. But mostly for Chrome browsers, if you're running into this issue and it looks like you just can't log in, even though you're using the correct URL, the correct username, and the correct password, you should be able to see and go to same site by default cookies setting in the flags page for Chrome and change this to disabled. So I'm going to change it back to default, which will cause, I have to relaunch Chrome, but it will cause this problem to happen, and we'll see what that looks like. So here I've relaunched Chrome with that setting turned back to the default value. And I'm going to open, so this is the code sandbox in its own browser window. I have the correct URL here, which is the App Dev Academy URL. I have admin and I have district. I try to sign in and it fails. So it just refreshes, the username and password disappear, which is probably what you were seeing. It looks like the login failed here. So if we actually open the browser here, let's go ahead and restart. We can see a couple things. So this is the main one. This is what's telling you that this is the actual problem you are seeing. It says a cookie associated with the cross-site resource at the URL of the server was set without the same site attribute. It has been blocked as Chrome now only delivers cookies with cross-site requests if they have the same site equals none and secure. This is the issue here. So this is basically saying that it tried to log in to that server and it failed. In order to turn that off, or there are a few different workarounds. You can change the way your server is configured. You can change the way your browser is configured, or you can use a different server. But the way in development, when you're developing applications, the easiest way to do that is to change this same site by default cookies flag from default to disabled, and then restart your browser. And now when this is back up, it's logged in again, so it is working again automatically. Does that answer your question? And feel free, I think it was Didier that had this issue. Feel free to, yeah, if that doesn't solve your problem, maybe there's something else going on, and feel free to reach out on Slack. But hopefully that helps. And I think some other people ran into that issue as well, so hopefully it's helpful for people. Great. Okay. Yes?
Yeah, we are doing it then. We'll let you know if it works.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I know that has a new feature of Chrome that has just started being introduced in the last month. So it's very, very new. And yeah, it can be quite annoying if you aren't expecting it. But yeah, it's worth looking into. Anyway, we'll continue here now with, I'm gonna make this a little bigger. We'll continue here now with creating an advanced query, use data query technique, using an advanced use data query technique here. So first, let's use create a basic query. So I'm going to give the response a name. So I'm going to say this query is going to be called my result. I'm just gonna, you can call it whatever you'd like. And then I'm going to add the details of this query, which are the resource. Our resource is going to be, let's get indicators. We can also have we could have an ID, we could have params, we could have etc. So let's add some params. So our params are going to be, we're going to say page size 3 and page is 1. So in this case, we're just going to get the first page of 3 indicators. So it should be the first 3 indicators. Let's go ahead and use this now. So in order to use this, we have to create a couple new variables that will destructure in an object. If you don't know what those words mean, basically we're saying that this is, I'll write it 2 different ways. So we have loading error data equals use data query. So this use data query is the main thing here. It's a React hook. We then do query. And this basically is returning an object with 3 properties: loading, error, and data. This is exactly the same as saying query results equals that, and then saying loading equals query results dot error, and data equals query results dot data. This is exactly identical to what I just had there before. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to that's just in case you weren't familiar with how to destructure data. So let's make it the very, very basic function that we showed. So if loading if error data dot my result. So the data object has the same shape as this query object. So my result is the results for this particular query, which is going to be the indicators. And then we're going to call that's going to have 2 properties. That is going to have .pager and .indicators. That's just how the response is shaped in that API. So data.myresults.indicators.map, and I'm going to say indicator goes to indicator display. Let's try that. May or may not work. Let's see what happens. Oh, okay, cool. So basically we've gotten, now they're kind of jumbled together, but we've got 3 different indicators here and their display names. and it's only 3. So if we change this page size to 5, we get 5 instead of 3. But this is kind of ugly, so let's change this a little bit. So instead of mapping to, let's move this to the next line. Instead of mapping to just the name, we're going to put this as actually, let's make this an li. Let's return. Oh. So this is going to give us a list of all of the items instead of putting them all on one line. Oops. This we need to make sure is actually referencing the variable. So now we have a list of 5 items here, right? So let's make this dynamic. So one of the simple ways that we said that we could make this dynamic was using pagination. So we could add buttons that say previous, next, etc., and then change the page variable. But instead of doing that, what we're going to do instead is we're going to change the page size. So we're going to make the page size dynamic. As Pete said earlier, the only things that can be dynamic or can be defined as a function in this query are the ID, the params, and the data properties. So let's make the params dynamic. We're going to take an object as the argument to this function, and that the value or the structure of that object is going to have a single variable, which is called, let's call it page size. Seems simple enough. And then we return. So this is another kind of advanced JavaScript or modern JavaScript trick, but this actually returns an object in this case. It's exactly the same as saying this. So I'm going to write it the more pedantic, verbose way. So this page size is not being used yet, but instead let's put it here. So page size is going to be dynamic now. So if we do this right now, what's going to happen? We saw that. Yeah, can anybody tell me what the page size will be in this situation? How many are going to show up? Anyone know?
It should be undefined, right?
Should be undefined, correct, yeah. So it's undefined because we haven't passed a variable to this query. So if I save that, undefined is basically just means it reverts to whatever the default is. And the default for a list of indicators, I believe, is 20, 50? I don't remember exactly what that is for the indicators endpoint. It's different for each endpoint, but we can define it here. So I mentioned this yesterday, so I'm going to use it as an example here as well. So we're still not passing a page size to this query. However, we could set a default here. So if page size is undefined, I want it to be set to 5, for instance. So this will now set it, if page size is not defined when this query is called, it will always set to 5 by default. Now we could actually override that when we use this query by setting an options object with a variables property. And you'll see that because this is a library that's written in TypeScript and has all these other properties, it's basically exporting the API surface, so it can tell you exactly what the possible options here are. So we have variables, we have lazy there. So it can pop up and it'll actually show you what the available options are for these objects. So we have variables, and that variables returns or should be an object with a page size property. So let's say page size is going to be 3. So now we're overriding this on the default to have a size 3 of page size. So now what would happen? This isn't super exciting because we're just back to what we started with, which is a page size of 3. But if this is undefined for whatever reason, it will be 5, and we can change it dynamically here without changing the query itself. So now instead of doing that, let's say we're going to use this as a prop instead. So let's add a property or a prop to this React component that is called page size as well. So now this advanced query component takes a single prop called page size. We can then define that explicitly and say advanced query component dot prop types equals page size is prop types dot number. We have to import that library. I believe this is correct. So we now know that there's a page size property, which is of type number, which will define the number of properties or number of indicators that are returned here. And so this is nice because the query has to be static. That's one of the kind of rules of the data query functionality, is that this query needs to be static and parts of it can be dynamic, but the object itself, the query object, should always be a constant variable. It should never change. That helps with caching and things that we're going to be implementing in the future. So we create this static query, we pass it to this useDataQuery object, and then we can override parts of it with these dynamic variables. If we pass the variables on this initial load, it will we can use a prop from this component to override parts of that query. So this is one way to kind of do an advanced functionality of this page size. But right now we're not doing that. So right now page size is undefined because we're not passing this prop to this component. So it's falling back to 5. If we go to app.js, we can see this is where we're actually rendering this component, and we can now pass that prop, which again, because it has the prop types defined here, it should give you a hint as to what is available. This takes a number, so we have to pass it a new number of indicators to show. Let's say 10. So now if I save this, it will render that same function with 10 instead of 5 or 3, a page size of 10. This is a nice kind of handy way to use dynamic queries to take props from a function or from a functional React component and pass them into the data query that you're using. So this is just one example of using an advanced query technique that we described yesterday. This one is one of the more basic ones, but it's basically dynamic queries or dynamic parts of queries, and using that specifically with prop types or with props for React components. I wanted to share this example because it's not the same as the example that I showed in the presentation yesterday. It's another way of using the same technique of dynamic queries, but using props instead of a dynamic callback with the refetch function, for instance. Again, there's tons more that you could do with each of these exercises, but particularly this first exercise. So you could have used the onComplete function and say we get the data back from this onComplete, and we say let's do something that isn't super exciting, but we could say alert. Let's actually do something that's more likely to be useful. So let's say console.log data. So if we do this, right, the application itself doesn't change, and I have to go over here to show you the console. And I should have a unique key property. I apologize for that. I'm not being a good React tutor here. So we do need to have a key property, so we can have indicator.id to make this work well in React world. You can see here that we have a console.log of the results of, or the data object, which has this myResult object within it. And inside that, I'm gonna.
Sorry, Austin, the phone says,
Yeah,
Very good.
zoom in a little bit here. So we have an object here that is the data. I'm going to actually change this quickly to say console.log data, so that we can see that this is actually the log we're talking about. So our data here is an object with a myResult key. The myResult key is the result of that indicators query. We have 10 indicators in the indicators key, and a pager, which has page 1, page count 8, total of 80, and page size of 10. So this is just a nice way using the onComplete asynchronous callback for this use data query hook to log the data when you're done. And this will only log once when the query completes. So if we change this to something that doesn't exist, so non-existence indicators as the resource, that's something that doesn't exist, right? There's no API in DHIS2 called non-existent indicators. If we change that and we look here, we see that we get the error. So we get the proper error handling for this component. Remember, we just are returning if error, return just the word error with an exclamation point. I'm going to add actually also here plus message error, should work. So now we get the actual error message as well as this error with exclamation point. So just showing that the error handling is working. But you'll also notice that in the console here, we don't have that data log. We got this 404 error from this API request because it doesn't exist, but we don't have the result here, the data console.log, because that is in the onComplete callback, which only happens when the data is successfully returned. If we then said on error, error, that, now we get this error logged down here as well. And you can, so this is a nice way to kind of interact with the data in a non-React way. So to log things is one example of that. Again, this is exercise 1. There's lots of other things that you could do with this this component. I saw that there were only about 10 or so submissions so far. So if you have any trouble with that or issues with it, let me know. Before we move on to new content for today, we'll take a break, but I will first go over very quickly one piece of the solution to the exercise 3. So this is just because we didn't really cover this too closely. I'm going to go ahead and give a part of this solution, and it will help to sort of show how to use a data engine specifically with an imperative query as well. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. No longer needed. Let's look at this one. So I have this application running locally. Oops, don't anymore. Okay, so this is the Pagination Solution, and I've added, so that the Pagination Solution exists in the repository. I'll commit the full solution in a little bit. Right now it doesn't have the full solution. It basically has the solution to the first parts of that exercise. So exercise 2 has a solution to exercise 2 without the bonus. So this exercise 2 has how to do pagination with refetching, et cetera, like that. That's all available if we look at the GitHub Academy page. If we look in here, which is where our exercises are defined, we have this Pagination Solution folder, which has the solution to these problems in the pagination controls, for instance. Anyway, this is the basic stuff, but the one that I wanted to share was the how to make the ability to edit a function, rename a visualization and to prepend automatically the name of the current user when doing that. So if we go to here, so I'm going to start this server. So in my terminal here on the bottom right, I'm going to say yarn start. Use this a little bit. So here we have it running. So part of exercise 2 was to make add this edit button. So you had the new button, you had the delete button, but we also have this edit button. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new one. Oh, and actually, sorry. So I did a little bit of a trick here. In order to kind of make this a little bit easier to work with, I added this filter to the visualizations query. So I'm creating a filter where I'm only showing the visualizations that have the username of the current user. Somebody changed it from John to Joan, which is nice. But I want to only show the visualizations that include the words Joan drawer in them. So that's why you're only seeing 2 pages of 6 or so here. But the new visualization that was just created is down here. If we see that as I click this new button, we're going to get several of these Joan drawer new visualization objects. I'm going to go ahead and delete those as well, so I don't have too many of them. Delete that one. So now we have only one page. The one at the bottom here is the one that I've created. These other ones are ones that other people have created and working on this exercise. So this Joan drawer new visualization is coming from the new button, and that's what we want to do, right? So the task in exercise 3 was that instead of this just creating a test, it should create username and then some other name. So how do we actually do that? That's what we're going to cover here today. So in the create new visualization button, this is where I've actually done this change. I'm going to show you the I'm actually going to show you the diff here. So previously, the version of this on the left is what was how we previously did this. So on the left, we basically just said, when we click on this button, we call this mutate function. The mutation creates a new visualization just with AAA test as the name. And that's basically it. There's nothing else really going on here. However, on the right-hand side, we've added a few things. So first, kind of the obvious thing that you need to do here is you need to add a query for the me resource to get the name of the current user. We'll get into how we actually call that query in a minute, but we needed to create that query. So I added that here at the top. Oh, and this should actually, it's getting all the params, but this should actually just say params. And then I've also changed my mutation so that I can pass in made it dynamic, as we just saw in the previous example, so that we can pass in a name. I'm calling it a namespace. You could call it whatever you want, but that's basically the name of the user. And then the resulting visualization that gets created should have a name of namespace plus these 2 colons plus the word new visualization. And this could be whatever you want to call it. So this could be a test, it could be whatever. I called it new visualization because it looks a little bit nicer. This is pretty straightforward though. So basically we've made the data property of this mutation dynamic. As Pete showed earlier, if you cannot do this, so you can't make the only the name property dynamic here, it has to be the entire data property. So the top part of this function, or this change, seems pretty straightforward. Now let's get to the bottom part here. So we have the actual component, and you'll see that this change is actually very, very small. It's not super complicated. That's because, so there are 2 different ways to do this. I've gone the approach of using the engine and the imperative query interface rather than using a second hook. So the other way to do this would be to say, use a use data query hook here with a loading, error, and data states above it. And that, yeah, we are not doing that here. Instead, I'm adding a second property that I'm pulling from this use data mutation, and I'm actually going to go back to just looking at the file because maybe the diff makes it a little harder to read. But basically here we have it. So instead of just saying const mutate and then get the loading state from this use data mutation, I'm also going to get engine. So as I mentioned briefly yesterday, every use data mutation and use data query also returns an engine property, which you can use to chain different different queries or mutations or do things in callbacks if you want to. It's recommended to use to use the engine sparingly. So you don't want to use it all the time because declarative data queries are much better than imperative, but I wanted to demonstrate it here. So there's another way that you could get access to this engine, which is what I showed yesterday as well. So if we didn't have that here, now the engine is undefined, but we could say const engine equals use data engine. So use data engine is another hook that is exposed by app runtime. And that you can also use to get the same exact thing as using comma engine here. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. So we've got this engine coming back from use data mutation. What are we going to do with that? We're going to use that to fetch right before we create a new visualization, we're going to fetch the name of the current user. So previously, this was just like this. So we were just calling mutate without passing any variables because previously this was not a dynamic query. And so instead of that, we're going to pass the namespace, and the namespace has to be the name of the me user. But where do we get this me object, which needs to come from the API somewhere? In order to do that, we're going to actually have this imperative access to the engine query. We're going to say engine, which we got from use data mutation hook, dot query, which is just a method on that object. And we're going to pass it the query, me query. So this is exactly the same as doing use data query, except that it's returning a promise instead of being executing as a React hook. And then we're going to assign that, as we saw here, we're going to assign that to an object with the me property. So just like before, the query result has the same shape as the query. It has a me property, which is the result of this me query. That's where we're going to get that object. So we get, we could also just say result and then say result.me.name. So this basically says, go to the server, get the result from this query, executing this query, wait for that to return. So this async and await is kind of an advanced JavaScript topic. If you're not familiar with async and await, you can also do this with promises, which is also somewhat advanced, but async and await makes this very, very clean. Basically, this says, this might take a while, so start it and then go off and do other things, JavaScript, and come back at some point in the future when this query has completed, and then we'll pick up where we left off and keep running this function. So that's kind of what async await does. You can read a lot more about that online if you Google it. So we're basically getting the result, waiting for that to come back to fetch the name of the current user, and then mutating that resulting functionality, mutating the visualization, which means creating a new visualization using the result of that function. So as we saw here, and then finally we're calling refetch, which we were doing before as well, which refetches this list. So we have this here. Again, we can, I'm going to go ahead and delete the one that I had created before. We can create a new one, and we see that it immediately shows up here. It has my name, my username, and new visualization. So we can also test here if I log out of this user. And now I'm going to log back in again as a different user. Oh, actually, I don't know if this will work. It's not gonna work. I don't know if I know the name of the different user. I don't. Anyway, if I logged in as a different user, which I would need to create a new user because I don't know the login for this account off the top of my head, it would create a visualization with that user's name rather than my name. So that hopefully, Sergio, I think that was your question. Hopefully that kind of, or no, maybe it was Pete, or maybe both of you. Hopefully that addresses that a little bit, and you can kind of see how you can use this imperatively to fetch data. Again, I would recommend using a use data query hook if you can, because that changes some of the dynamics of these things. In this case, we're never actually, the reason this is okay and not super problematic is because we're fetching this the name of this user only for to use it in a mutation. We're never actually rendering it on the screen itself. So if we were rendering it here, we would need to deal with loading states, error states, etc. And we would also not be able to take advantage of some future functionality of the app runtime, which will allow us to automatically update this when the username changes, for instance. It wouldn't be able to do that automatically. So that's why it's okay to do this here in an imperative style, and hopefully this kind of demonstrates that a little bit. I'm sorry that I've taken some of Hendrik's time probably, so we'll push the time out just a little bit, but I think we're gonna now go to a 15-minute break. Looks like there are some things coming up here.
Sorry, Austin, can I ask you a quick question about all the things that you have just explained? If you go back to the code, please.
Yeah.
In this case, and because the onClick function is asynchronous, it is mandatory to use the engine for the data query, because, for example, if you put there an if data, and because the rest of the function is asynchronous, it's going to work as well, right?
So you mean if we used this as a let's say like this, right? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, actually, yeah.
So okay, I'm just going to do this very quickly. Use data query, me query. So I'm not going to use this anymore.
And then you put there an if data inside of the onClick. And if the data is arrived, then you mutate with the data.
So I think I see what you're saying. So the difference here. So we have. I use data queries. Okay, so so this would work. The problem here, so we can see. I think what you were saying is you say if data, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So the problem here is that if you when you click new, right? Mm-hmm. This might not have already loaded. So it does actually work in this case. There's a race condition.
It works maybe because the next thing you do is a mutation and is with a wait. If you are making another query, for example, and you are relying of more queries, maybe that will not work. But for this case,
yeah, so it does work in this case. There is a race condition here, so you have to be a little bit careful. And the race condition, there are two issues with this here. So first is this use data query actually runs when the visualization button loads, right? So when the page loads, we get the name of the current user, and it's kind of stored in this button sort of thing. If this username changed, if I kept this page open for days or hours, and the username changed before I clicked this button, it would still have the name of the user when I first loaded the page, which could be problematic. So that's one issue. The second issue is that if I load this page and then click very, very quickly, the data might be undefined here, right? So because this is loading on the page load, so if I turn this to a very, very slow network, for instance, and then refresh this page, I don't know if I'll be able to do this in the right amount of time, but
I see your point. Yeah.
So it'll load, and then when I try to do the mutation, it won't have gotten the name. Let me see if I can click this.
So it won't
have gotten the name yet.
Yeah. So it will not mutate.
that may or may not have worked. I don't know.
Well, no, but I see what.
Yeah. So that's another challenge. You could get around that as well. So you could say if query loading or loading, then we disable this button. So the button actually can't be pressed until the query is finished loaded.
Yeah.
And then you technically don't even need this because the on-click wouldn't happen, but it's safe to keep it there. So that's one way to do it. Another way would be to have a refetch and then call that in the asynchronous function as well. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, perfectly. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. I'll be posting this solution as well up to the without the use data query, so in the imperative case, to the GitHub as well, so that everyone can use it, can find it. Okay. Thanks for that question. I think that was useful. Let's see. Hints on renaming functionality. Wahed, can you let me know if let's see if this was answered. Pete, was that answered for you?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, cool. Just let me know if there's anything left. So the renaming functionality, that's a good question as well. So one, and again, I'm sorry, Hendrik, we're kind of pushing into your time, but I think that's okay. It's a shorter day today. So I've also implemented the renaming functionality which is exercise 2 here in this solution. So I'll show that quickly here as well. So we have this visualizations table, and basically the only change here, you can actually see what that change is. I've just added a second button before delete visualization button in this button strip, which has an on-click that calls onEdit, which is a new property for this component, with the visualization ID. So basically it says you've clicked edit on this visualization. And that's all it does. It just calls this callback function that's passed to this component. Then in the visualization table, this is what I wanted to actually show here, is that this is how I am conditionally rendering a modal. So I have created this edit dialog, which internally has a modal from the DHIS2 UI library. And I'm saying if we've set an edit ID, which means we're editing a particular component or particular visualization, then I'm going to render this dialog modal. So I've passed this onEdit function down to that component that we just saw. When it gets called with an ID of a visualization, it sets the edit ID, which is a state variable. And this is getting maybe a little complicated, but hopefully people are able to follow, which is a state variable in React. And then when that variable is not undefined, then we render this dialog. And when we close that dialog, we set the edit ID to undefined here. That basically lets you, if we go back to my, to this here. So I'm going to create a new one here. It's called this Joan Traore new visualization. I now have this ability to click this edit button, and it opens a dialog. I'll show what that dialog does, but basically, I'll show the code briefly, but I'm not going to upload it just yet. But basically what that dialog does, and let's go ahead and just look at the dialog by itself. It has a query. It also has a mutation, and it uses two different things. So it uses a use data query, it uses a use data mutation, and so we have loading and error states for both the query and the mutation. And actually, sorry, this should be loading. Error. And then we have an input field, which is a controlled UI input, which allows us to create and set the name of this function. One of the sort of tricky things that I've done here that makes this a little simpler than it could be is that I have this state variable. So I have a name, and then I have a function which allows me to update the name of this state. Sorry, this state. And that's the only thing that I'm using to control this input field input. So the value of this input field is always the value of that name field. It's disabled when we're loading either the query or the mutation. And when we change it, we update this state variable. But the problem with this, if we didn't have anything else going on, is that this name doesn't get set to the name of the visualization on load. So how do we get the initial name of this visualization? Since we only have the ID, we don't have the name, we have to wait until it finishes loading. So I've used this onComplete callback, which basically says, once this query has finished loading, we're going to set the name of this state, set the name state to the name that is returned. This is a little bit of a tricky way to use that onComplete functionality to set a local state variable as well. But it works quite well, because then you can see, actually, if I change this to fast 3G, if I click edit, it loads briefly. So when I initially load this dialog, it's both, I'm going to change it down to slow 3G so we can really see it. It's both disabled and has a ... until the name loads. Now it's enabled. Now I can edit it. Now I can click save. Slow 3G, so it takes a while. It then refetches. Yeah, and it should be in there. Oh yeah, because I have the filter, it's no longer showing up. But yeah, so that's a quick kind of hint and overview of how you might approach the exercise 2. I realize this is, for people that aren't as familiar with React, some of this could be a bit intimidating. So don't feel free to ask questions about React things. There are a number of good resources on the, here we are, on the GitHub. So again, this is the GitHub URL. It's linked on the Academy website. Under resources, there's this prerequisites page, which has a number of good resources linked on tutorials for learning React, hooks, and more. But feel free to ask any questions if you have any questions. All right, let me see if that answered what we wanted to say. Great. Yeah, okay, I think that sounds good. Yeah, cool. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's about it. Let's take a 10-minute break here, and then we'll come back for some more content. This time we'll talk about generic applications and things like translations and data store, and being able to use an application across different DHIS2 versions and instances, and that Hendrik's going to lead that session. we'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back. And feel free in the meantime to post any questions that you might have on Slack as we go forward. Thank you all very much, and we will talk very soon.